Boa tarde a todo mundo que acompanha o Esquenta COMPÓS. Meu nome é Rafael Groma, eu sou diretor científico da Associação Brasileira, da Associação Nacional dos Programas de Pós-Graduação em Comunicação. A gente tem o Esquenta COMPÓS, uma organização em conjunto da Universidade Federal do Maranhão, Imperatriz, que neste ano recebe o encontro anual da COMPÓS, a partir do seu programa de pós-graduação em comunicação, em um esforço conjunto com a diretoria da COMPÓS. Hoje é quase um almoço COMPÓS, espero que vocês estejam bem. E a gente recebe hoje o professor Tommaso Venturini, que vai falar sobre o seu recente livro envolvendo Cartografia das Controvérsias. Para moderar e debater o evento de hoje, eu chamo ao palco o professor Carlos D'Andrea, da UFMG. O Carlos D'Andrea é professor permanente do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Comunicação da Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, é coordenador do REST, Estudos de Redes Sociotécnicas, pesquisador nível 2 do CNPq, subcoordenador do PPG-Com da UFMG e vice-coordenador do GT de Comunicação e Cibercultura da COMPÓS. Obrigadão por ter aceito o convite, Carlos. Em nome da COMPÓS, agradeço muito a você e ao Tommaso também por esta conversa que teremos logo mais. Boa tarde.
Boa tarde, Rafa. Muito obrigado pelo convite. Boa tarde a todos e todas que nos escutam. É um prazer enorme estar aqui, né? Não só é um evento da COMPÓS, mas também porque vamos conversar com um pesquisador que eu pessoalmente admiro muito e sei que é importante para muitos de nós aqui no Brasil, né? Então, saúdo aí a diretoria da COMPÓS, os colegas do Imperatriz, na figura da Camila, e vamos nos esquentando aí para a COMPÓS daqui poucos meses, né? Não sei se você já chama o Tommaso agora, Rafa. Eu vou conduzir, pessoal, tudo em inglês, ou quase tudo em inglês. Acho que o Rafael fará um esforço de tradução de algumas questões no chat. Depois o bate-papo estará disponível com uma legenda automática em português, né? E, enfim, temos também alguns trabalhos do Tommaso em português que serão mencionados aqui logo na apresentação. Okay, yeah.
Hello, hi.
Yeah. Hello
hi,
again,
everyone. Thank
Tommaso.
you very much. Hi, Carlos. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight.
Yeah, it's our pleasure and also an honor to have you with us here this afternoon, just after lunch here in Brazil. I will make a very brief presentation of yours and your research and your new book, and then, of course, the main attraction will be your conference. Okay. Well, Tommaso, as you know, your research has been appropriated very intensively by Brazilian scholars. We have been here in Brazil more than once. You have been here more than once, I guess.
Just once.
And just once, yeah. I thought it was
unfortunately twice. Just once.
Yeah, you may have a second opportunity. You will. And some Brazilian PhD students, also professors, have worked with you there in Europe. Some very great people from Brazil, and I am on this academics that are deeply influenced by your research. Not only the articles you have published as a single author, but also with a range of collaborators you have, Richard Rodgers, Liliane Bonegru, and of course, Bruno Latour. So yeah, thanks again. Thanks a lot for being with us this afternoon. Who is Tommaso? Tommaso has a very large experience as a professor in some of the most important universities and research centers in Europe, among which the École Normale Supérieure of Lyon, sorry for my bad French, King's College London, and the Sciences Po Paris, where he coordinated the Media Lab. Nowadays, Tommaso is a researcher at the CNRS, the Center for Internet and Society in France, associated professor at the Media Lab of the University of Genève, and founder of the Public Data Lab. For more details, I would recommend everybody to visit his personal website, which is quite complete, tommasoventurini.it, tommasoventurini.it, IT é o top-level domain for Italy. Yeah. So controversy mapping, digital methods, data journalism, data activism, and STS, science and technology studies, are his main topics of investigation. As much as I know, 4 of Tommaso's articles have already been translated to Portuguese. And the whole is always smaller than the sums of his part, which was written by Latour and has Tommaso as one of the co-authors, was published in 2015 at the Parágrafo Journal. Em português, o todo é sempre menor que as partes, um teste digital acerca das mônadas de Gabriel Tarde. And also the paper Actor Network versus Network Analysis versus Digital Networks. Are we talking about the same networks? Written in co-authorship with Andreas Munk and Matteo Giacomi. Was translated by Thiago Salgado and Leonardo Melgaço and published at Galaxia Journal in 2018. Atorrede versus análise de redes versus redes digitais. Falamos das mesmas redes. Esse é o nome em português. And 2 other articles em português, o tecido social, rastros digitais e métodos quantiqualitativos, escrito com Bruno Latour, e exploração visual de redes para jornalistas de dados, in co-authorship with Matteo Giacomi, Liliana Bonigru, and Jonathan Gray. These 2 articles were published as chapters in Portuguese in the ebook Métodos Digitais, Teoria, Prática e Crítica, which was organized by Jana Joselli Omena in 2019. Yeah. But today, I presume that Tommaso is going to focus his conference on his just released book, published a few months ago, which is called Controversy Mapping, a field guide, written with Andreas Munk. In this publication, Tommaso revisits some of his most cited and important articles, including diving in Magma, how to explore controversies with actor network theory, which is a very important article to reintroduce the debate on controversies also for the communication studies field. I can say that the book's mix and combine is a solid theoretical background with many examples, illustrations, methodological insights. So it's a real field guide book that's very useful for different kinds of researchers. I also would like to say that this is a kind of book that we should pay more attention here in Brazil. It's very, very useful, and we miss it. And personally, Tommaso, just to finish, I should say that I am looking forward to read this book since you first mentioned that you both were reading. You mentioned it in 2018 there in Amsterdam. You generously share a draft with me, and we read it with a lot of excitement in our research group, and now we have just started reading the final version of the book. So it's a great, great pleasure to read and debate this publication we are looking for so many years. Thanks a lot. The word is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlos. This was a wonderful presentation. It was so thorough and complete that actually there's not much that I can add to that. But yes, as you say, I have been working on a lot of different stuff throughout the year, since when I was at the Media Lab of Sciences Po, where this whole controversy mapping adventure started, and then through all the other institutions that you have listed. And my research, as you know, it has been really, it's been a little bit all over the place. I've always sort of enjoyed changing my research subject and jumping from one topic to the other. But if there is one thing that maybe not, but maybe if there is one thing that sort of binds together all these experiences and works like a sort of fil rouge that connects everything together, is the work around methods. So I'm also very interested in more substantial topics about media studies, particularly in the last month and years. I've been working on the attention cycle, so attention economy and the acceleration of the attention cycle. And before that, I work on communication about the environment and climate change in particular. But besides all these like more specific topics that I've touched upon, often working with other scholars that I'm much more expert than I am on this subject, the only thing I'm a little bit expert of is methods. So how to develop new methods, but also like combine them with sort of more classic methods to do social research. And this book, which I will talk about in 1 minute, controversy mapping, it's really about that. It's really about one method, or really not really one method, but like I'd say a bundle of methods that I've been developing, not just by myself, but with many colleagues all around Europe. And before we move to controversy mapping, so this specific type of bundle of methods, I think I would like to say that to me it's very important to keep a very open mind when we talk about methods. Maybe we'll discuss that later on, but for a few of the papers that I publish are on qualitative methods, which is this idea of going beyond the classic distinction between qualitative and quantitative methods in social sciences, which is something that I have not invented myself, but I've stolen from Bruno Latour, with whom I've worked for a long time. And for a long time, I thought that was very important, that it was important to find ways to overcome the limits of qualitative methods and quantitative methods by sort of a little bit mixing them together, but also finding other research techniques. But then more recently, I realized that actually that's not the most important thing that we were doing. The important thing that we were doing is trying to refuse to abide by the limitation of sort of the classic methods that we learn in the schools of social sciences. Not because they're not good, they're really good, right? And I'm not at all saying that people should not study or learn or use traditional methods for social research. They should. It's a great legacy that we have from our discipline, but sometimes a legacy that binds us a little bit, in the sense that we then think that that's the only thing we can do. And by working, from my career, I've worked a lot with people from mathematics, computer science, data science, physics, and they are much more open than we are as social scientists about methods. Like for them, it's really normal to invent a new method to study a new subject. And actually, if you look at the history of natural sciences, a lot of the time, what we call inventions or like discoveries, they start with the introduction of a new method. Someone they decide to, okay, there's this problem, I'm going to try to study in a different way. And that is something that I believe we don't do enough in the social sciences. We tend to think that we should stick to sort of the classic methods, either of ethnography, if you do qualitative methods, or to sort of pools and statistics, if you do quantitative methods, and maybe mix them a little bit, or maybe even mix them a lot as a mixed method, but not really invent new method. And I think that this is something that we should do more. So when we say qualitative methods, and I will probably use that expression a little bit in my talk and then in the presentation, what I really mean is something that is really beyond qualitative and quantitative methods. It means being creative and original, and do not limit ourselves to what we have studied in school, but actually try out different types of methods so that we can see different types of things. And this is a kind of a leitmotif throughout this book, which I really would like, which I'm very happy to present tonight, which I wrote with Anders Munch, who is associate professor at the University of Copenhagen, there, and who is, who has been like really as important as me in the writing of this book. I'm gonna show you a few pages of the book. I'm gonna share my screen. Entire screen, share. Can you see the cover of the book? Not sure.
Not yet, I guess.
Weird. 1 second. Okay, this should work. Okay, this should work. You should see the cover of the book.
Yes, I guess so.
Good, perfect. So, so this book has been a very, very long work. As you said, Raphael, I shared a very early version of it a long time ago. I think we worked on this book for maybe about 10 years or something like that. So it started really as a collection of some of the materials that myself and Anders had prepared for our course in controversy mapping. We were both teaching controversy mapping. I was teaching it in Paris at Sciences Po, and Anders was teaching it at the University of Aalborg in Copenhagen. And we both had a very practical approach to controversy mapping. So I remember when I started teaching controversy mapping, it was Bruno Latour who sort of invented the course at the École des Mines in Paris, and then sort of imported it at Sciences Po. And when I arrived at Sciences Po and I started teaching with him, I had like almost zero instruction from him on how to do controversy mapping, right? And that was not, and that was on purpose to some extent, right? So his whole philosophy, so Bruno's whole philosophy of teaching controversy mapping had been so far to just sort of basically kind of sink or swim. So it would sort of push the student into the water of a controversy. It would tell student to choose one controversy, which had to do with science and technology, but that was the only instruction. And then they would have to sort of follow it and then find a way to visually represent it, which, worked very well. I have to say, all the work that we have done so far, and of course I'll talk about that, to make more explicit the instruction of controversy mapping and provide some guidance in this work. I think they've added something, but I also think that sort of the original way of doing controversy mapping, which is just pick a controversy and try to make it legible, that also just worked, right? The old book could be one page, not one sentence. It will be just pick a controversy and try to make it legible, and that works also as a pedagogical exercise. On the other hand, of course, it's very complicated, right? So if they just told you that you can do it, you will learn a lot of things, but that would be extremely complicated. And we knew that, and we see our students struggling, and we also were struggling at the time. And so what we did was trying to put together and sort of wave together all these experience that we learned from our teaching, but also from our own research, stuff that sort of colleagues told us or we learned from them, and try to provide precisely a field guide. So a book that is not a theoretical book, that is not an anthology either, it's not a reader, but it's really something that you are supposed to take with you on your trips to the field of the controversy that you study. And so it took a lot of time. It went through a lot of rewriting, but this is the final table of content of controversy mapping, a field guide. And I have to say, I will sort of briefly go through the different chapters, so to give you an idea of what's in this book. But the structure of the book, first of all, the book is divided in three different parts. The first part is on the features of controversial landscape, so which is basically the main items or objects or actors that you would study when doing controversy mapping. Then the second is about the tools of social cartography, so it's more methodological, and it introduces a bunch of different digital and non-digital tools for doing controversy mapping. And the third part is about the politics of controversy mapping. So how to use controversy mapping, not just a way of teaching science and technology studies, which is why this method was invented in the first place, but also as a way of doing political intervention in social situation, in public situation. So the books also contains, and it's probably the best part of it, a preface by Rodger, which is really, really interesting. So I really, really recommend reading it, in which Richard goes back to the history of digital method and makes the point that digital methods, or at least sort of the kind of digital method that he was doing and he's still doing, had been inspired from the beginning from actor network theory. So actor network theory is this kind of weird social theory. I'm hesitating a little bit because its own authors would not call it a theory, but it's kind of weird social philosophy who had been developed by Bruno Latour, Michel Calon, and John Law around the École des Mines, but not only, which is about studying science and technology and digital methods. Since the beginning, at least in Richard Rodger's ideas, was a way to operationalize, to make actor network theory operational, to give tools and techniques and methods to do actor network theory. And this is also what we try to do in the book, right? So the book, I go briefly through the different chapters, but that was the most difficult part of the book, to keep together and sort of to blend two very different, well, again, not so different, right? Because Richard was saying that, as Richard says in the preface, he was inspired by actor network theory, and yet digital methods on one hand and actor network theory on the other hand had developed in different directions. So actor network theory became more and more theoretical, but with sort of, again, little instruction of how to actually do it. And then digital methods become very practical, very useful in that sense, but with not so much theory, or so a little bit of theory from media studies, but not so much theory in STS and social theory more generally. And what we try to do in the book, and that's the thing that was the most difficult, was to sort of blend together these two traditions, which were parallel and which had been looking to each other a lot, but no one had, really take the time to explain how one and the other, how one is the operationalization of the other, and how one is the sort of theoretical inspiration to the other. And then the book is also concluded by sort of an interview or a conversation that we did with Bruno Latour, which is also great. So I really, really recommend to read it, because it also put this book and also controversy mapping more generally in the context of the contemporary situation in the public debate, and particularly media public debate, which is very different from what it used to be when we started teaching controversy mapping and when we started writing this book. At the time when we started working on controversy mapping, science and sort of scientific experts and technical experts were very strong, right? They had a very strong hegemonic position in society, and their voice were very loud and very clear. And not everyone was listening to it all the time, but generally, they have a lot of sway and power in society. And so controversy mapping, a lot of what controversy mapping was about allowing other voices to be heard, and sometimes sort of criticizing and opening the black box of science and technology and of expertise, and sort of showing that experts are not always right and are not always sure what they do. Uncertainties are very normal in science and technology. Disagreement is very normal. Controversy are not an exception, not exceptional moments in the development of science and technology, but really sort of the everyday life of science and technology. And then, little by little, we all assisted, we all witnessed this kind of progressive loss of power and influence of the expert, and increasing skepticism towards science and technology, which to some extent is a good thing, but on another extent, it also create a lot of problem. And so to some extent, unexpectedly, controversy mapping also became a way of rebuilding trust in science and technology. Not the kind of unquestioned trust or unquestionable trust, but on the other hand, a trust that is based on questioning science and technology. And by questioning and looking at disagreement, uncertainties, controversies, quarrels, etc., we can rebuild some trust, because we see that that these controversies are not easy to close. That it's never evident. There's never just a truth out there which magically solve the controversy. And yet, on the other hand, they're never solved in a way that is completely random. There's always a reason, and often a good reason, why a scientific or technological controversy is sort of closed in one direction rather than another. And we come back to this discussion in the conversation with Bruno too. So I'll skip the introduction, but the introduction it basically tries to summarize the whole book, and it provides an example, which maybe we can talk about. It's a controversy that has been described by Charles Thompson about the management of a natural park and the elephant population of the natural park in Kenya. It's a very good piece of STS, and we use it to show what controversy mapping is like. So we take the text of Charles Thompson and we produce a series of maps, just sort of the classic maps that are using controversy mapping to show how one could sort of unfold our exercise in controversy mapping. And then part one begins with a chapter which is about, as you can see, accepting complicity as map mapping. So it's about why we should do controversy mapping. And this seems to be kind of an obvious question for someone who write a 300-page book on controversy mapping, but actually it's not, right? So controversy mapping, it's also very demanding. It's a very difficult method. We'll certainly discuss about that later on. One that is that it's technically difficult, that is conceptually difficult, that requires you to work a lot, talk with a lot of people, read a lot of documents, go through a lot of archives, visit many situations, and situations that are often kind of dangerous to some extent, or at least dangerous for your reputation, because precisely you're in a controversy, so people disagree. The situation is very heated, and it's very, it's very possible to then become part of a controversy and be highly criticized. And that's actually what happened to Anders as well. As you can see, he was doing controversy mapping on wind turbine in Denmark, and he was accused to be a spy. And I don't know if you can see it in this image, but there was also kind of Nazi iconography, right? So they were criticizing as if there was some sort of NSA spying on Denmark citizen, which of course they were not. But to some extent, this criticism is not totally unwarranted, right? So when you enter in a controversy, you should know that you're, basically entering a minefield, and that there can be consequences for your reputation, for your work, etc. So you have to be aware of that. But then you also know, that there are advantages of doing this type of methods, which is what we try to describe in this chapter. And there are advantages that have to do on the way we can then open up the black boxes of science and technology and observe their inner workings, which are generally, not very visible, for good reason, right? Because we don't want to reflect on the inner workings of science and technology all the time. We're just happy that it works. But when it doesn't work, and when it creates problems, then we need to be able to open it. And it's, not always easy. But controversy mapping and controversies help to do that. And the second reason is that controversies help making technical solutions, social technical solutions, more robust, right? Precisely because there is contention and controversy. The solution that is finally chosen is one that tends to be not necessarily optimal, not necessarily the best one, but at least one that is robust, that is capable to resisting sort of the heat of controversy. And then the third reason is more political, and it's about the possibility to open up science and technology as a space for public debate, right? Which is not always the case. As we said, when we started doing controversy mapping, a lot of people thought that science and technology was a matter of experts, right? And then the public has nothing to do nothing to say on science and technology because it was something for specialists. And we really disagree with that, and we try to explain how controversy help to understand that. Then there's a chapter on issues. So basically, as Bruno Latour called them, matters of concern, where we try to basically explain which are the different elements, so the conceptual elements that can enter in a controversy. So a controversy is always a very complicated thing, and it has to be sort of decomposed in sub-controversy or sub-issues, which then are, sort of not necessarily easier to treat, but at least, you can start to make some sense of the different parts of the controversy. Then the third chapter is about the actors of controversy. And that's also very important, because when you start doing controversy mapping and just looking at a controversy, you will then definitely very quickly be confronted to the fact that the actors of those controversies are much more numerous and diverse than what we would expect in social sciences. And that's also a very classic idea of active network theory, maybe the one idea for which active network theory is the most known for, that, in social situation, human actors are not the only actors that play an important role. The non-human actors, which means technology, natural elements, institution, collective groups, etc., they also play an important role all the time. And we have to treat them as fully fledged actors. Of course, there are actors of different types, and no one has ever said that non-human actors are the same thing as human actors. That would be, just very stupid and wrong. But they are also actors, right? So we have to take them into consideration. That is what we do in this chapter. We try to explain, first of all the different types of human actors that enter in a controversy. So the expert, the policymakers, the regulators, the campaigners, the socialists, civil society groups, etc. But then also the non-human actors and how they do their role in controversy. So the second part, as I said, is more methodological. It begins with a chapter that is on semiotics and ethnography, because even though controversy mapping tend to be known for its sort of digital techniques, which I'll speak about a little bit later on, and which are of course very important in this technology, in this methodology, controversy mapping actually started before digital methods, and for many years it was carried out with the methods of ethnography and semiotics. So ethnography it's quite well known. Semiotics is less well known. So people know, you certainly know what semiotics is, but generally is used for the study of texts, literary text, or other types of text and documents. But one of the intuitions of active network theory was that semiotics can also be used to study socio-technical situations, socio-technical arrangements. So someone also called active network theory as material semiotics, and I think that is actually a good way of describing it. It's like semiotics for things, or to be more precise, for arrangement of people and things, and we try to explain that in this chapter. Then, of course, we move to the digital methods, which are really important in controversy mapping, and we try to describe a little bit the history of digital methods and how they developed first from scientometrics, so the study of data from scientific publication, which of course still are a really, really important source of data for studying science and technology and scientific and technological controversy, of course. And then from there, I'll move to other type of digital methods, precisely in search of this quantitative, or this overcoming of the limits of quantitative and qualitative methods toward, as I said before, toward newer, more different type of methods. And I think this is a very important point to make, because when we talk about digital methods, a lot of time people tend to think mostly at sort of kind of big data technology or computational social sciences, or today artificial intelligence. So lots of data and very advanced computational techniques, which they're fun, they're important. I also use them in my research. I enjoy them very much. But there's also there's also much more that we can do with digital methods. It doesn't have necessarily to be very computationally intensive or data intensive. But I think what is sort of refreshing and important about digital method is this possibility to open up new ways of doing research. And we try to talk a little bit about that in this chapter. And then there's another chapter of digital method, which is more hands-on, where we try to explain basically very basic concept about crawling the web, scraping digital documents, searching, using search as a research tool, search engine, as a research tool, which is something I've learned from Richard Rodger, and basically how we can repurpose these, to use the word again of Richard, how we can repurpose this technique that comes from computer science and information science to do social sciences. And then we have a chapter that it's very important to us and also quite original, even though we've been publishing other paper on this, as you remember, some of them have been translated in Portuguese, on this technique that we call visual network analysis, which is about analyzing network not through graph mathematics, by visualizing them. And you have an example here in this page. And so there's many reasons which I don't have the time to go into, but we can discuss about that later on if you want. But there are many reasons why we think it's interesting to look at network and not just to compute and calculate networks. But the most important one is that visual network analysis preserve this idea of looking at the difference in the density of connection. So rather than just calculating, where clusters or community are in the network, you look at which regions of the network are denser, so they contain more nodes, which are more densely associated, and other regions that are more sparse. So there are less network, there are less nodes, less connection. And this, we believe, is a very, very close operationalization of actor network theory. So we believe that in general, network theory is exactly about that, about becoming sensitive to the difference in the density of the association. And that's why we are so interested in visual network analysis, because this is something that is easy to say, but actually very difficult to experience, but that one does experience by doing this type of research. And then, so the part 3 is about the politics of map mapping, and it becomes on a chapter on geography, in which we try to discuss this idea of, like, we try to take seriously the idea that controversy mapping is a form of mapping, right? So, of course, there is some metaphor to it, and it's actually easy to, for a long time, I have to admit that myself, I bypass the question about why controversy mapping is a form of mapping, but just saying, it's a metaphorical. It's mapping is not geographical mapping. It's mapping in a metaphorical way. It just means visualization. But actually, it's more complex than that, right? We call controversy mapping and not controversy visualization or controversy diagrams or whatever, for a reason. And the reason is that mapping, in the sense of geographical mapping, it's a really good way, the best one that we humans have, to represent things of different kinds of heterogeneous things. Remember that what I said before, that the actors in controversy mapping can be of very different type, human, non-human, collective, individual, etc. And we have to represent all this in the same visual space. And that's very complicated, but geographical mapping, that's exactly what it does. And of course, geographical mapping has been developed, for several centuries, and that's why it's so good. But we can take inspiration from it, and also sort of learn how geographical mapping is not, it's never neutral. It's not just a question of sort of objectively or neutrally representing a landscape, but always a political intervention, right? So we talk about mapping for navigation. And of course, that's an important part of geographical mapping. But of course, we should not remember that geographical mapping has been invented for state making, for war in the first place, and for taxes and then sort of state administration in the second place. So there's clearly a very, very strong political use and power use of geographical mapping, and we use this, and we reflect on this, also talk about the politics of controversy. And the last chapter, and then we'll conclude my presentation on this. The last chapter is about the politics. About the a particular type of political intervention that Anders and I and other colleagues developed working on controversy mapping, which is called the data sprint, and which is, you know, sort of a little suggestion of a format to invite, which is inspired to hackathon and datathon from the open coding movement. And it's a way to invite different types of people to work together for doing controversy mapping altogether. And then the books conclude on a conclusion that tries to explain how controversy mapping fits in the sort of environmental, ecological, climatic crisis which we are experiencing today. But maybe we'll discuss about that later.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Tommaso, for this great overview of the book. Really appreciate seeing the book in the print version, because we have already read only the digital one. So beautiful pages. Looking forward to touch it soon. I have a few comments as a just to highlight maybe some aspects that Brazilian colleagues may be more aware of, or we may discuss for the later, and also a question, we'll say, something that I'm really curious for a while to hear you. I'd like to emphasize how important is the science and technology studies perspective for Tommaso's way of seeing the controversies of operating the methods, of proposing new methods. Generally, people don't know so much that the STS here in Brazil, in the communication field, it's much more common reading only or mostly the actor network theory, which of course is part of the STS, but it's not everything. Maybe a few words about the STS. It's a really transdisciplinary field. We have anthropologists, sociologists, but also biologists, computer science engineer, lots of scholars that we all know, like Donna Haraway and Bruno Latour himself, are totally self-defined as STS scholars, not only, but like founded in these places and many others. In the communication field, not only Tommaso and all his colleagues, but we may mention Tarleton Gillespie in the US, studied the algorithms, all the Dutch guys, coordinated by Richard Rodgers and also by Joseph van Dijk, there in Utrecht. So there are a lot of good research being done in the communication and media studies field worldwide, very much inspired by the STS, which I think it's important to put into light, because your book and your work is very much inspired on that. And this also has a lot to do with the methods of way of looking and using and creating the methods, as you said. I like pretty much that sentence that the Rodger's first book, when he says that we should look for the methods of the medium. At that time, he was saying like we should follow the medium, and then he says we should repropose the method. So you should repropose the platform, the medium, but seeing things in a different way, but also understanding how the medium works. This is pretty much how STS works with science. We want to know how science is produced, not to say that science is human and fallible, but to say that it's a very strong kind of knowledge, it has the peers, the negotiations, the publications, the material operations, the money, and everything else. So its size is strong because it has a lot of elements that are entangled into its information. So yeah, if you maybe want to comment something more about this methods things, because sometimes people also think that digital methods, it's a synonym of computational methods, as you said, and it's not, if you see in this perspective. Using digital methods or adopting the digital method perspectives means understanding that data comes from a very specific socio-technical system, which may be a platform, which may be a database. So sometimes the data itself, working with data itself, it's considered digital methods. In the sense it's not. And also sometimes people think that's only based on visual network analysis, and as you showed us, it goes much beyond that. The network analysis is pretty important because it shows connections, or it represents connections. You have a great text that was translated to Portuguese that discusses that, but there are many other forms of visualizing, of seeing these relations, these power relations, this groups, there's alliances, and there you go. So yeah, so these are a couple of things that I would like to highlight or to emphasize, and you probably mentioned most of them. And just a more different question or different topic. And in some of his most recent interviews, not only during the pandemic period, but also before, Latour said that he was like not sure to what extent the idea of controversy it's like enough to understand the contemporary world. And he means, in one of his interviews, which is published in this book, which was published by my university press recently, he says that we don't share, controversy is about sharing the same world. Like, we may not agree, we don't agree with each other, but we share something in common. Or as you say in your article in 2010, we agree in that people agree in their disagreement. Like they don't have to, it's not about consensus, it's about to have ways of discussing and going forward with something. And as much as I understand what Latour is saying, that's we don't share the same world because some people live on Mars, in the sense just metaphorically, but maybe in some years they may live literally in Mars. And some people lives in a, I don't know, we've had much more concrete and necessities to survive. It's about inequality, of course. But so I think Latour was very provoked by the Trump elections and then all the extreme right extension all over the world, and unfortunately also here in Brazil. What to think about this idea? I mean, I pretty much appreciate the idea of controversy. I use it, and I think it works for a lot of things. But maybe we are in our situation is so complex that we cannot even call it controversial anymore.
It's a very good question, Carlo, and also a very difficult one. So I think there are at least two things that should be said. So one is the one that Bruno was saying, which I think is very correct. So when we started doing controversy mapping and STS, as I said, science and technology were really strong, and they sort of constituted the frame of reference for basically everyone in Western society, at least, right? And in modern society. So there were no outside science and technology to some extent, and that's still true in a material sense. So there's still no outsized modern science and technology that you know, except from very few outside. There are a few communities, a few of them in Brazil, by the way, who lives outside modern technology and sort of resist and survive outside modern technology, but they're really, really marginal. unfortunate to some extent. And there are people that sort of are trying to create new community by sort of living off the grid, and living and sort of living this sort of framework of material framework of infrastructure in which we all live. But it was also very marginal, right? So to some extent, there's no outside to the material of the infrastructure of modern science and technology. But on the other hand, there is more and more a sort of I don't even know how to say cultural outside to that, right? So the culture of modern scientific thinking is not as dominant as it used to be. And I think that's what Bruno is talking about. So before, until one decade ago, I don't know, it's difficult to put my exact year on that, but a few years ago, we kind of we could disagree. We always disagree. We never agreed on science technology, but we kind of disagreed by agreeing, right? So we were in the same kind of roughly same or similar framework, and then in that framework we disagreed and stuff like that. So when you read Stephen Epstein on, for example, IDS patients and how they try to play a role, and so we knew the way ADS research was done and drugs were distributed. They were still, they were questioning a lot of what was doing, but they were kind of in the same framework, and they could speak the same language. They actually learned to speak the same scientific language, so they could actually speak with doctors, and nurses, and drug producer and researcher. And nowadays, more and more, there are people that kind of refuse this kind of discourse, and that culturally lives in a different framework. So I think that's what Bruno is saying about. We don't live in the same world. I don't think it's true. I don't think I think Bruno. I disagree. I would disagree with him on the material side of the world in which we live. I think we do live very much in the same world, which is also part of the problem. But we don't live in the same culture anymore. And I think that's a more accurate way of describing it. So controversy mapping, at least in the beginning, was supposed to, describe controversy of people that disagree while being in the same culture. But then, how do you describe people disagreeing while being in different cultures? And that's also, it's possible, but it requires a twist of the method. But then there's also another thing that I think it's to some extent even more important for someone that like me do also media studies, and which is that controversies are also become weirdly popular. So they have to be some stigma. They were considered sort of a bad thing when I started doing controversy mapping, and people were like, "Oh, you do controversy, you study controversy, but that's not something we should solve as quickly as possible. Why would you like to dig into that and make them last even longer? Controversies are a bad thing. We want to get rid of them as quickly as possible." And that used to be the common sense, maybe even still 5 years ago. I don't think it is anymore, because what people have been discovering on media, digital media and social media in particular, is that controversies are a great way of capturing and retaining attention. So they work really well as a mechanism to tweak the attention economy and to become sort of successful and serve the attention economy, because they're really good for and to some extent we're using this appeal of controversy in controversy mapping to anchor, just to create enthusiasm in our students, and it worked, right? And so now people are using it a lot. They were doing that before as well. There was comic criticism as well, but now it's really widespread, right? So everyone, look at what happened at the Oscar the other night. So I don't think it was like I don't know if it was prepared or not, but it doesn't really matter. But clearly, everyone is talking about that right now. Right? No one knows what film won the Oscar. We're all talking about the slap and the controversy that ensued, because it's a great way of capturing attention. So when that happened, controversy mapping as a technique need to become much less naive than it used to be, because there's a lot of controversies that are created and entertained, not so much to be solved, but just to capture attention. And when that happens, then we have to explain that and show that, and not just not just also give it more and more attention. That would be a bad idea. When a controversy is created just to, there's this nice expression in English which is outrage farming, to farm outrage, to cultivate outrage and so make money, monetize outrage. Then the role of the controversy mapper changes a little bit and became less one of drawing attention to the controversy and more one of showing to what extent the controversy can also be artificial. And so what is the productive side of the controversy and what is very unproductive side of the controversy that should be reduced as much as possible.
Okay, thanks a lot for your answer. I have lots of notes here. I'm sure Camila is in with us now. I'm not sure that we have already some questions from the audience. But you are pretty much talking now about, for example, fake news or junk news, as you like to say. Like you have a great infrastructure that is totally prepared to trick the attention of people using bots, using clones, and so on. And this is controversial in the sense that they produce controversies, as you said, artificially. Yeah. So the controversies have always been looking for a socio-technical view. So technology is part of the game. Like it's okay to use technology and technological resources to convince someone in the controversy, but nowadays we are going beyond that. That's really like great infrastructures and a lot of money just trying to create artificially these controversies, right? Yeah, very good. And Tommaso has a very interesting article on fake news and infrastructure. I would also recommend it because it discusses in a not so common perspective, I would say. Yeah. And we have some questions, Camila. I have another one, but definitely the audience should. Let me see here in the chat or. Okay, and I'll go one more. Can I, Tommaso?
Of course.
Great. It's a great opportunity. Yeah. Here in Brazil, we have a STS inspired approach that it's called CTS, which like I like to say very and this is a very intimate way to say that it's a tropical version of STS. It is led by a lot of scholars. I can mention Ivan da Costa Marques, which is a very prominent scholar in the STS fields worldwide. And something that the CTS guys do is like trying to look at the science and technologies in the Brazilian or in a Latin American perspective. Consider, of course, that we are a very specific region of the world. We have lots of situated knowledge. The way things happen here is different from the way things happen in Europe or in the US and so on. And also to recognize these different kinds of knowledge, like traditional people knowledge, the indigenous, people from the African diaspora. And so it's not, of course, refusing the idea of the expertise that you mentioned previously, but going beyond it, like how does the scientific expertise works with or sometimes collides with this traditional knowledge, and I would add, these are my words now, with all these parallel worlds guys that create the conspiracies that here in Brazil it's not so different of what happens in the US, with all those big holes that the guys are trying to create to create a parallel narrative about them. And so what, I mean, how should we use the controversy? How should we appropriate the controversy perspective, taking in account that, science here in Brazil, it's yeah, it should be more important, but it is of course important, but it's not exactly like in Europe or the US in terms of police making and decision taking. So do you have any tip to how to appropriate the controversy and also the SDS perspective in what sense, considering that the technology is with us, we have infrastructure, not everybody, but we have some infrastructure, we have most of the equipments and the technology, but we are not exactly European about surnames like such as mine are pretty much Italian. Yeah. Is this a point
No,
for you?
it's also very good. It's also a very good question. I have to say that, well, first of all, also we Europeans are not as Europeans as as you may think, in the sense that we are also have the exact same type of problem that you were describing, except for the indigenous people, but that's of course not a problem. Is the richness that you have and we don't have, except for there are some indigenous people in the north of Europe, but not where I live. But also I think it's important to say that I don't really personally, I don't really subscribe the kind of depression that is that seems to be the many scientists and experts seems to be suffering, right? So I understand that they come from a moment where their word were sort of listening to, and everyone would sort of pay them respect and accept their authority even without questioning. And I understand that it can be shocking that today more and more people are putting that authority in question. But I don't think that it's necessarily such a big problem if we accept that and we and we learn to deal with it. So I'm not at all saying that. Of course, I'm not at all defending the sort of conspiracy theorists or people who are spreading fake news or jack news. That's not at all what I'm trying to do. But on the other hand, I think that sort of science and technology and scientific and technological experts still remain very powerful in society. So they completely have the means, the communication means, but also sort of the resources that are needed to have their voice heard. It's a bit more difficult. So they have to learn to sort of take more time and make more effort to make their point, and they cannot just assume that what they say will be sort of believed and accepted because they are the scientists, because they are the expert. That doesn't work anymore, or works less and less so. And even though I think that most of the time they're right, and I'm still very much, I'm in that sense I'm still very, very European or French. I really much, I still very much believe in science and science rationality. That's all, I've been trained for that, and I work in the academia, so I'm a scientist myself, a social scientist, but still. So I still very much believe in that, but I also think that we should stop thinking that there is some sort of divine primacy or sort of primacy to scientific knowledge compared to other forms of knowledge and culture. So as I said before, yeah, it's more complicated because now there are people living outside the techno-scientific culture that we're used to, but that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily a tragedy. We can learn to live with that. It's complicated, but I think it can also be interesting. And lately, I've myself been studying a lot marginal communities, working with people, Sal Hagen and Mark Tutors and other at the University of Amsterdam, who are working on what they call the vernacular web, so marginal groups in Reddit and 4chan and 8chan and all this kind of underground platforms of the web, where kind of QAnon comes from and all this kind, the worst thing of the web come from. And these are really, these are really bad places, where people are generally not nice at all. They tend to be racist, they tend to be white supremacists, they tend to be, very to the far right, very anti-women. So it's really nasty places, and yet they're actually culturally interesting. So there's a lot more happening there than what is happening in the mainstream of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and stuff like that. Right? So there is much more, and I'm not saying that it's a very complicated, again, argument to make, because I most of the time disagree very, very, very much disagree with the people completely, and yet they're culturally interesting. So there's stuff happening. They're creative from a cultural point of view. So I don't say that we should learn from them, not at all, but we should study them and understand them and give them a little bit more. They're not just crazy people. It's more complicated than that. They're people we disagree with, and I think we are right to disagree with them, but they're actually also interesting, culturally speaking.
Great, Tommaso. Thanks a lot for this answer. I know it's not an easy question in terms of something that we're living on and trying to understand. I listened to 99% of your answer. I was not in the screen because just for a second, but I listened. Now we have a question. In fact, Camila was offline, so she could not send us before, but now I have it here. We have a question from Raquel Recuero. It's a permanent scholar here in Brazil that studies social network analysis perspective, and this is exactly what she is asking you about. If you can explain a little bit more the intersections between the social network analysis and the cartography of controversies, and I may add the visual network analysis, which was the expression that you mentioned. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, with pleasure. Yeah, I'm a very big fan of social network analysis. I think it's a very extremely interesting technique, and precisely one that I've always refused to be squeezed into this qualitative distinction. It's always been a sort of a third way or a different way of doing research. So I have a lot of respect for that tradition for this reason. I think that, so the intersection is really big. So we do use a lot, and we do present a lot of methods that come from social network analysis and controversy mapping, and in the book, maybe the main difference, but I don't think it's a major difference. Some people in social network analysis disagree, but I don't think it's a major difference. The kind of networks that we do are not just there. I very much believe they're social networks, but they're not just made of individuals. So generally, in the sort of the mainstream of social network analysis, maps are, nodes are people, right? Individuals, persons. And that's not the case for controversy mapping. We have much more heterogeneous networks, which we try to put together sort of individual, collective, human, non-human, all sorts of also entities. Also because that's the kind of, that's the world in which we live into, but also increasingly that's the way, that's the kind of the data that we have, right? So when you go on social media, for example, everyone can have even Facebook, which is supposed to be a medium in which is centered about people, right? So compared to other social media, in Facebook you're supposed to be a person and you're supposed to use your actual name to create a page. But then you also have pages that are groups, and also have pages that represent natural elements. So you have the page of a river, the page of a mountain, which of course is maintained by people who like the mountain, but still it represents the mountains. And that's Facebook, but like for other media, it's even more than that, right? So there is this kind of heterogeneity that is in the word and also in the data, and I think we should just live with that and include that in our network. And then, as for the visual part of what we do, so as I said, to me and to many of my colleagues, the visual part of visual network analysis is very important, but it's also something that comes straight from the origin of social network analysis. So the person who invented visual network analysis, Jacob Moreno, was also the person who invented social network analysis. So nowadays, I think a lot of people doing social network analysis do more calculation than diagrams or the sociograms, but it's really in the DNA of these methods. And so I think there's also a reason for friendship between controversy mapping and SNA.
Okay, thanks a lot for your answer, Tommaso. Very clear, and I also may add that Raquel, which made the question, she has published a few years ago, I think only in Portuguese, an article exactly discussing this difference between, not exactly controversy, if I remember well, but between the actor network theory approach and social network analysis. I think it's a paper with Gabriela Zago and Marco Bastos, I guess. Maybe Raquel can send in the chat later. Yeah, well, Camila has just said that we should stop. I agree with her. I mean, unfortunately, now we're in so great discussion. If you want to make some final words, Tommaso, maybe add something, new projects. We'd like to hear a bit more from you.
Well, yeah, my new project is precisely working on internet subculture. So I've grown more and more interested in this sort of weird thing that is happening, that happens at the margins of the web, sometimes in the big platforms, but often at the margins of these big platforms. And so I'm working with Matteo Giacomi and Mark Tutor on this Atlas of the Weird Web. So that's my main next project. But I still keep working on also a little bit the mathematics of the temporal side. So visual network analysis has one big limit, which is great to show spatial relations, topological relationship, but not so great to show temporal dynamics, which I think is also something very important nowadays. More and more important because of the way the infrastructure of online attention works. And so I'm also working with mathematicians to describe mathematically and develop ways to study these up and downs of online attention.
Great, thanks a lot. I hope this margins keeps on the margin. Unfortunately, here in Brazil, they are in the central, they are in power, in the government. We hope to change this soon, but definitely we have lots of bizarre things to be studied here too about how people is using not the major, but also these not so famous platforms as you mentioned earlier. Thanks a lot, Tommaso. It was a really pleasure to talk with you. I can say in the name of the COMPÓS Association, everybody else that watches us now and later. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you, everyone. It was great to be with you tonight.
Great. Yeah. See you soon as possible. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.